Thank you very much indeed. On the DPhil in particular, I said even very recently that the older I get, the more convinced I become that God absolutely is active in the world, but the less I understand how he does it. I would like to say that divine action must be true because I find myself here today, right now. My profound thanks to Bishop Pete for the invitation, to the Dean, and indeed to all of those who facilitated and made me so welcome and made this moment possible. I'm going to ask you to join me in a brief moment of prayer while I ground myself and each of us in the words I'm about to speak. Most gracious God, thank you for our bodies. Thank you for the privilege of being here in this moment with one another. I ask you in your infinite mercy to take my words and use them to bring light and life and grace. Amen. Thank you. I'm conscious that artificial intelligence is such a big and unwieldy subject that actually I need to start with a pre-introduction before I even get to the lecture. The reason I think a pre-introduction is necessary was put very nicely by a guy called Brad DeLong, an economist who wrote a book called Slouching Towards Utopia. In a blog he wrote just over a week ago, DeLong said, "I do not know how to handle the intellectual crisis tsunami now coming down on me from the creation, development, and societal consequences of modern advanced machine learning models, other than to find a flotation device, hang on for dear life, and start kicking as fast as I can. But I do know some things. As they make text extrusion 5 times faster, the real crisis moves to reading, filtering, and not going insane." I think he's right. I think that information overload makes it hard to know where even to start talking about artificial intelligence, let alone how to distinguish what the most important things are then to say. So I'm not going to explain the techniques of AI in any detail at all this morning. I think that all you need to know about every form of artificial intelligence is that they involve classification of something for the purpose of prediction in that same class of thing. So in the case of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of the other so-called large language models, they're not even classifying and predicting words. They break everything down into smaller tokens. And as DeLong rightly pointed out in his blog, if you feed these things a wise string of tokens, wise tokens will come out. If you feed them stupid conversations, stupid tokens will come out. And I promise you that really is all that you need to know about artificial intelligence for the purposes of what I'm going to say this morning. What you need to know about Christianity is that it is a fully tried and exhaustively tested flotation device, even for a time such as this. And now I can start the lecture. Artificial intelligence is rocking the foundations of society. It is transforming culture and social structures at an absolutely breathtaking scale and not just at an eye-watering pace. AI is, the stock aphorism has it, calling into question what it means to be human. Quick and disruptive societal transformation because of a technology race, well, that's happened before. Last month, the Wall Street Journal estimated that the space race cost the US around about 0.2% of its GDP each year. In the mid-1800s, over the course of about a decade or so, the US created a new physical network spanning the entire country from east to west that was called the railroad. That race was 10 times bigger than the space race. It completely transformed America. But right now, 2026, just the 4 big US tech giants, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet, by themselves have already announced annual investments in AI totaling 2.1% of US GDP. That, my friends, is the railroad plus half a space program, just for this year. So the race to build AI is, I think, the biggest technological race in history. Whether every aspect of that race is really a good idea is, I think, a very sensible question to ask. But whatever your answer, just as the US railroad transformed America profoundly, so now AI is transforming the ingredients of culture and society around the entire globe. So what I want to interrogate in this lecture is not the technology itself, is not specific tools, techniques, or methodologies. I'll come on to the ambiguous meaning of the term artificial intelligence itself in due course. But I think a bigger question presses, one that cuts to the heart of whether and why and when to use AI at all. The stock aphorism that surrounds me everywhere all the time at the moment is that AI is calling into question what it means to be human. But I'm going to try and persuade you that we need to understand the ambitions of those controlling and shaping this race toward ever more powerful AI, and then to set those against the divine purpose for human being, so that we can know what to anticipate, what to welcome, what to redirect, and even what we might need to resist in this race to build and then use ever more powerful artificial intelligence. Those building it insist this time is different, and that we are on the cusp of an epoch like no other, a moment finely balanced between unimaginable risk and incalculable reward. Whether they are right or wrong, the implications for how we continue to develop and deploy AI aren't just a question of human meaning. When and how and whether we choose to use artificial intelligence depends on the point of being human. And how we answer that question of purpose and who gets to choose the answer matters enormously. The point of being human is not a statistical or probabilistic question. It's not just a scientific matter, and it mustn't be left to politicians or to banks or to a small coterie of billionaires to decide. We all have a stake in what is happening now and a stake in what happens next. Our collective response to artificial intelligence, that's going to determine everything from our children's education and future employment prospects to our relations with neighbours near and far, our own relationship with these new technologies, our political, our practical relations with the material world, and yes, our own self-understanding. The capabilities of AI and the point of being human are interconnected because we either use AI to augment or we use it to undermine, eliminate even, the very point of being human. So to summarize the lecture that follows, we are between times. The past is no longer possible, but the future is strangely undependable. We've steadily restricted the point of being human to nothing but material and process. And so as technology's ability to replicate or mimic human processes increases, the mixture of hopes and fears for artificial intelligence have taken on a distinctly religious hue. Some argue there's no longer any point to being human. AI is just next in the evolutionary queue. Others argue the point of being human is to build and control godlike AI. And yet a third group say the point of being human is to build AI that we can then somehow merge with in order to ourselves become godlike. To which Christianity replies that humankind is created in the image of God, who is goodness fully realized. And the point of being human is therefore to know God and to enjoy him forever. God's purpose for AI, then, is to augment human being, not to usurp, not to supersede, and certainly not to replace it. And so one key response to AI is a clear-eyed assessment of when and how it helps and when and how it harms our own flourishing. But beside the immediate benefits and harms, and alongside these hypothetical and metaphysical risks and rewards, any new technology always brings unintended and indirect impacts that lag the race itself. Which is why we need to start with ourselves, not with the technology. The way to decide what to use AI for, how to use AI well, and indeed whether to use AI at all just because we can. The way ahead, I think, is first to resolve the first and foremost question which is before us, which is, what is the point in being human? Once we're clearer about that, then we can formulate our practical responses for ourselves, for one another, for the common good, and for the future. The best way to understand where we are now is to know how we got here. The term artificial intelligence was invented by this chap here, John McCarthy. He invented the term to get funding for a conference at MIT in the 1950s. The sociologist Charles Taylor has identified, I think, many of the ingredients that account for the resonant and enduring power of McCarthy's term, artificial intelligence, by carefully unpacking a historical trajectory that has spent the past 500 years and more separating theology and science and philosophy into separate realms of knowledge. Earlier, medieval cosmology had no clear distinction at all between the immanent and the spiritual. But over the course of recent centuries, this biological and what we would now call transcendent rather than spiritual cosmology, well, it's been replaced. Taylor uses the term disenchantment, replaced first with a clockwork and then with a more broadly mechanistic, machine-like cosmology. Both the external world and the internal world, internal experience, have been reduced and reframed according to the metaphor of machine. Over time, objective truth has become ever more limited to those things that are externally observable and scientifically verifiable. Final cause, the point of being an acorn, say, has gradually been squeezed out in favor of efficient cause and formal cause, the matter and the process that turn an acorn into an oak. And in this new paradigm, there is simply no point asking why an acorn becomes an oak, only how. Similarly, the historian Peter Harrison has shown how these two Latin terms, scientia and religio, well, they began as inner virtues, aspects of character development, but were then also gradually transformed into what he calls external territories of knowledge, something facilitated by the invention of the printing press, further disrupting the earlier perception of human being as tripartite, as biology interwoven with soul and spirit, all working in unison toward a final purpose. The emerging methods of scientia and this new metaphor of machine transformed what it means to be human into a concern only with material and process. And so both the meaning and the point of human being have become nothing but. I want to show you how I think this reached a crescendo in the 20th century. This bit might seem a little bit dense. You don't have to remember the names. You don't have to remember the points. I just want you to see the trajectory and how we have reached the world that we inhabit today. So in the 20th century, the philosopher A.J. Ayer tried briefly to reduce the point of being human to nothing but what can be verified positively using scientific method and logic. Ayer discovered very quickly for himself that there was a great deal more to being human than that. And then someone called B.F. Skinner reduced the point of being human to nothing but the interaction of externally observable human behaviors and their environment. This so-called radical behaviorism, it had no space or need for the internal world of experience and value and encounter that cannot be observed from without, that could transcend the material world alone. And then Daniel Dennett went on to argue that you're just an intuition pump. All of those things, all of that internal experience of encounter and questionable meaning that makes you, all of that is just epiphenomenal noise. It's the waste byproduct of neurons and synapses doing their own thing. And then finally, in the 1970s, a biologist called Jacques Monod replaced Western philosophy's concern with teleology, the final purpose or point of things, with something called teleonomy. Monod argued the universe itself is nothing but the sum of chance and necessity. Meaning and purpose are nothing but illusory projections that evolution just happens to have found useful. And what is the fruit of this technology? Well, if the point of being human turns out to be nothing but material and process, well, then what's to stop us replicating that process in another kind of material? And so it was that in 1950, in a now famous paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Alan Turing simply replaced the question of whether a machine can think with an imitation game, one that has captured the world's imagination ever since. After all, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck. 15 years later, one of the godfathers of AI, Marvin Minsky, insisted that you, are nothing but a meat machine. And Yuval Noah Harari still sells a lot of books claiming that you, are nothing but a hackable machine. And yet, those transcendent, directly unobservable, unmathematizable encounters with hope and fear and longing for truth and for meaning and for joy, for having a point of being alive and having a part to play in the universe, and that niggling sense that there ought to be, has to be, some point to being you, they remain. Of course they do. And I think what Taylor does so very helpfully is not simply the historical excavation work that explains why it is the meaning of human being has narrowed, but also to surface how this deeper question about the point of being human remains. A question that persists in what Taylor calls the cross pressures that prove inextinguishable, even after we have dismissed the significance of bios, body, of soul and of spirit, even after we've eliminated the very possibility of cosmic purpose. You see, if we really are nothing but hackable meat machines without anything else after the physics, well then of course artificial intelligence will begin to entail everything about us in the machines that we build, including our religious intuitions and impulses. Have you ever asked yourself why it is they're called the godfathers of AI? Whether it isn't a little bit odd that a company like Anthropic now talks about needing to give its large language model Claude something called a soul. Why it seems sensible to debate whether a piece of computer code might ever need human rights. I think that one way to summarize these features of the current meaning of the term artificial intelligence borrows a phrase from John the Baptist. We must become less so that they our inventions may become more. And I've come to find some really quite striking parallels with Christian faith and practice as I explore the narrative around AI. Rejoice, so many voices proclaim. Rejoice, for the kingdom of AI is near. But this promise, the advent of this new kingdom of AI, it depends on grace, not law. Regulation would stifle innovation. Oh, and it can only be inaugurated, realized through the common ownership for the common good. So we, you and me, we must surrender all of our data and creativity to be used for its training. And then there are the different denominations. The AI Pharisees preach superintelligence, while the AI Sadducees say there is no AGI, no artificial general intelligence. And see how the Pharisees argue amongst themselves. Will it be 2027? Will it be 2031? Well, the truth is that no one knows the day or the hour. Okay, I'm being a little flippant. But actually, I think only a little. Because this collapse of language, religious or otherwise, from metaphor to simile to identicality of meaning, when we start to talk about ChatGPT thinking, Claude learning, Gemini understanding, and so on, is, I think, why the debate space and the discussion space around AI is both so oddly crowded and so incredibly diverse. This erosion of difference between human and machine, this flattening of meaning, this careless use of anthropomorphism when we describe AI in human terms, is why AI's religious connotations don't look out of place. But when God is dead, and the ancient ways all lie ransacked, what kind of saviour do AI's inventors believe it will turn out to be? What exactly is it that we're racing towards? When the AI race is won, what will the point of being human be? Well, for a number of entrepreneurs in and around Silicon Valley, the only point in being human will be consumption. As one recent Forbes article put it, Silicon Valley invests in replacement because the economics are irresistible. You can sell one AI therapist to 10 million people. You can't scale 10 million human therapists. Replacement removes the constraint of human time and expertise. One product serves infinite customers with zero marginal cost. According to Sam Altman, chief executive of OpenAI, when the race is won, well, in 2015, he said this: I think that AI will probably most likely sort of lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there'll be great companies created with serious machine learning. According to Elon Musk, the prize for winning this race will be, well, again, in 2019, and just last year, he said this: it increasingly appears that humanity is a biological bootloader for digital intelligence. Some people think our time is up as a species, that there is just no point anymore in being human. AI is next in the cosmic evolutionary queue, and it's time for us to get out of the way. Some think we can build AI that will give godlike capabilities that we will or won't be able to control. And some people think that we can somehow merge with AI in order to ourselves become godlike. Should we take these concerns seriously? Well, I think on the one hand, I've already indicated the absolutely unprecedented level of investment, trillions upon trillions of dollars, in developing and deploying artificial intelligence as quickly as possible. The race is on to build AI with superhuman capabilities, whether you or me buy the metaphysics, the supposed finishing line, or not. More mundanely, last summer, then Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle, insisted that the only way the UK government could credibly engage with US companies like OpenAI was by using the tools of statecraft. It subsequently emerged that Kyle had asked Google's boss to sense-check the government's own AI policy. So on the one hand, AI's inventors genuinely believe that this time is different, and they have a very great deal of money and quite a lot of power on their side. But on the other, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes insists there is nothing new under the sun. And I think there are good reasons in history to think that may be right. Human culture overflows with perennial myths, warnings about the hopes and fears that so many people are putting in AI right now. Ancient warnings about playing with Promethean fire, about the apprentice usurping the sorcerer, about the making of golems and Frankensteins, about an entirely human loss of control of our own finite creations. And given that AI is transforming work and culture and power, none of us are as shielded or as far removed from these underlying religious beliefs and ambitions as we might wish we were. What then is the Christian response to such hopes and fears and concerns? Christianity's response is that the point of being human is grounded fully and finally in the purposes of God, who is goodness itself. Aristotle philosophized that the point of being human is to know, but knowing must surely end with whatever it is that is most worth knowing. And Aristotle concluded that the final point, the ultimate point of being human, is to know how to live a life of what he called eudaimonia, happiness or welfare or the good life. Thomas Aquinas showed how those terms, happiness, welfare, eudaimonia, most fully known, those are names for God, the Christian God, who is the source of those very things. And that is why in Christianity, the point of being human is, as the Catechism, the flashcards of Christian doctrine put it, the point of being human is to know God and to enjoy him forever. But I want to emphasize that in this Christian understanding, your coming to know God, goodness fully, that cannot be accomplished in isolation. Your knowing God fully depends on loving knowledge of your neighbor too, because God's goodness is imprinted in each one of us uniquely. We can know this goodness, eudaimonia if you prefer, which is an aspect of God because we are somehow made in his metaphorical image. Because of this divine likeness, we have the capacity to recognize and to replicate the good in ourselves and towards one another. God's creation is good. We are somehow, however mysteriously and mystically, we are formed in God's own image, and God has seen everything that he has made, and indeed it is very good. For me, the theological point being communicated here is not that human beings are equivalent to God, or even that human beings are at the center of God's creation. Rather, it is that human beings have a very particular ability to encounter the source of all creation, and therefore to encounter and know and pursue the goodness and the joy that accompany encounter with these things, because they are most fully and finally found in God. Now, before connecting this with the race towards superhuman intelligence, I am going to pause here for a second. I really hope there is at least one person sitting here who does not share my particular faith, because far and away the most interesting conversations I have are with atheists. I'm not going to suggest that this is some kind of a proof text, I was an atheist until my mid-teens, and I've always been fascinated by those profound questions of meaning and value. But I do just want to pause here because we live in a culture that has so completely normalized the phrase person of no faith. I think the person who's done the fairest but clearest rebuttal of the idea that it's even possible to be a person of no faith is a philosopher called Michael Novak, who wrote a book about 15 years ago now called No One Sees God. We are all in this business of being human together. But the reason I think it's so important to emphasize the impossibility of being a human being of no faith is because the risk, I think, is that this text and the meaning it points us toward is simply dismissed as some kind of optional extra, when in fact the choice isn't whether to have faith or not, but what it is we're going to put our last unavoidable after the remaining response, after the physics remaining response to life's cross pressures. What are we going to put that step in? What counts as good then? How do we recognize God? You will hear much discussion about AI alignment, about getting AI to do things that enhance rather than usurp human interests. Good AI, AI that aligns, augments, and increases human being. There are some phenomenally helpful AI tools doing this kind of augmentation, removing the barriers that separate human beings from one another, like language translation, at least in the world's majority languages. Augmenting by enriching the lives of people who really struggle with language or with reading difficulties. Delivering new kinds of prosthetics, enabling people who are blind to see. And better rates of medical diagnosis, and the common good is augmented by AI tools that map and monitor the planet's health and habitats, that track and eliminate waste, duplication in logistics and travel and transport, that better forecast the strength and the track of devastating storms and forest fires. So the benefits of AI are as real as the harms. And it would be a gross misunderstanding to think that God has no place for these things, no purpose for these benefits and capabilities. But in that case, why is aligning AI so very difficult? Why is it so hard to get AI that really does augment learning or companionship or social or political relations? Well, some of that challenge is technical, the gap between what AI's inventors are hoping it will do and what it turns out to do. The truth is that nobody at this point has a clue how to build a machine of loving grace. But a lot of it also has to do with the self-oriented exercise of human power and the difficulty of loving neighbor as self. Christianity has a lot to say about humanity's own misalignment, our internal, personal, disoriented encounter with goodness and with evil, and about its restoration and realignment in the person and work of Jesus Christ. But that would be a different lecture. The key point, however, is that from the Christian perspective, AI will not make us gods and could never give us control over God. Which, if you ask me, is pretty good news looking around right now. But another important set of risks lurk around artificial intelligence's unintended and indirect consequences. I began the lecture by referring to the impacts of the race to build the US railroad system on American society in the latter half of the 1800s. In 1964, Marshall McLuhan, reflecting on the newest technology of his day, broadcasting, famously wrote that the medium is the message. But he then goes on to give, I think, a really helpful illustration to help us understand what it is he means. The railway did not introduce movement or transportation or wheel or road into human society, but it did accelerate and enlarge the scale of previous human functions, creating totally new kinds of cities, new kinds of work and leisure. Airplane, on the other hand, by accelerating the rate of transport, tends to dissolve the form of the city, of politics, of association, quite independently of what any particular aeroplane is used for. The tools and services of artificial intelligence, they're not just passive carriers. Each AI tool and function comes to have a secondary and distinctive impact of its own. That's why we now talk about a social media landscape, and why it is that we're discovering new affordances of generative AI all the time, some of which are very welcome, some of which really aren't. As McLuhan says later on in that same essay, it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and the form of human association and action. And let me introduce you to this man, Joseph Weizenbaum, computer scientist widely credited with creating the world's first chatbot Eliza. His program mimicked something called a Rogerian psychological therapy. The user would interact with Eliza by typing into a keyboard. The background pattern matching program, these days we would call it an algorithm, then identified a key term in the input text. In order to continue the exchange, it would just put that out in the form of a new question. Now, this was the 1960s. Eliza was an astonishingly primitive, simple program, prone to crashing, easily exposed as a machine. Eliza could not pass the Turing test. And yet it would only be fair to say that Weizenbaum was utterly horrified at the results. He was shocked when users quickly formed a close and intimate personal bond with Eliza. Even his secretary, who had seen the whole process from beginning to end and knew all about the code and the scripts and how it all worked, sat down at the keyboard once only to turn to Joe Weizenbaum and ask him to leave the room so she and Eliza could have some privacy. Joe Weizenbaum would be beyond mortified at the very thought we could ever replace 10 million human therapists with one AI therapist. But what many now call the Eliza effect is growing. It's growing as these AI companions and AI therapists become ever more available and ever more human-like. Weizenbaum's concern with the broader relations between humans and computers grew in a way that I think can be very helpfully correlated with McLuhan's aphorism about the medium becoming the message. In a very prescient paper written way back in 1973, Joseph Weizenbaum insisted it would be the indirect impacts of the computer on society that would prove to be the most significant. What is wrong, I think, is that we have permitted technological metaphors, what Mumford calls the myth of the machine, and technique itself to so thoroughly pervade our thought processes that we have finally abdicated to technology the very duty to formulate questions. Where a simple person will ask, do we need these things? Technology asks, what electronic wizardry will make them safe? Where a simple person will ask, is it good? Technology asks, will it work? Thus science, even wisdom, becomes what technology, and most of all computers, can handle. This was written in 1973. But it's why we need to pay attention to the goals and motives of AI's creators and implementers. not just any particular new tool or services capabilities, because those inventors, those investors, they are part of the veiled voice of the technology itself. What, though, can we do practically to respond to the flood of AI that is now engulfing us? Let me draw the various threads of this lecture together by considering some practical actions. Approaches to AI that will augment human being by extending the good uses of AI while also avoiding the harms that undermine the very point of being human. I suggest that good uses of AI should be viewed through three very distinct lenses. What is good for self, what is good for neighbour, and what is good in the sight of God, who is good in its fullness. What counts as good interaction with AI for the self? Well, that is a matter of character as well as activity. And so good uses of AI will balance opportunity with judgment and self-control. The machinery of modern life invites our souls toward a kind of decadence. Patience, perseverance, self-control, those stand in the way of engagement and demand more tolerance for life's frictions than Silicon Valley has any appetite for. But the ancients have long associated the good life with cultivating character, with generosity, with moderation, with selflessness, as the only route to becoming what moderns would call maximally human and Christianity would call whole. Science and spirituality are not external territories, and they're certainly not at war. That was always a myth. So cultivate your own spirituality as well as your thirst for knowledge. Treat them as balancing virtues of character, your character. So set screen limits. Play nicely, speak kindly in cyberspace. Avoid those things that are, or you begin to realize are, digitally addictive. Don't outsource your learning, your critical thinking, your sermons. Don't outsource your questions to an AI to do all of the thinking for you. Be wise. Understand the ways and the extent to which your agency and ability to choose how to use AI is constantly being deliberately disruptive by addictive design choices. And so be intentional about overcoming those frictions that are designed to trap you on a platform or a service. Use AI well by understanding its risks and trade-offs, and so improve your own level of AI literacy. Secondly, using AI well has to be assessed in relation to its impact on our neighbour. The question, who is my neighbour, is pretty much as old as the question, what constitutes the good life? The two greatest commandments in Christianity are to love God and to love every neighbour as self. Those are very high bars indeed. But we live in a culture which is experiencing the most profound crisis of loneliness. So be a charitable reader, speak constructively, fact check before you repost. Keep an eye on those who are talking to AI chatbots. If it's helping them a little, that's great, but watch out for those moments when they begin to isolate themselves from their families, their spouses, their friends. Don't trust everything an AI therapist tells you. Persuade them they need to have more human relations. Do unto others and do that which augments, encourages, supports, and loves them. And finally, the good use of AI has much to do with God, who is the author of all creation. Good uses of AI will understand its physical and material costs in a finite world, will understand our wider duties to augment our non-human biological neighbours, and indeed our duty to future generations. So don't fall for the AI imagery of clouds or the language of zero marginal cost. What have I used this lecture to argue? That it is not enough to focus only on the capabilities of every new artificial intelligence technique, tool, or service. Partly because starting with the technology shapes the very questions that follow. Partly because technology always carries important but indirect impacts. But also because the motives and the ideologies of those controlling the development and deployment of AI also carry immediate and important implications for us all. Their ideologies, their religious beliefs are shaping the race toward AI and giving it some of its most distinctive features, not just the invention, but the implementation. Among all of the benchmarking going on with AI, remember the key test is this. Is this particular tool or service used in this particular way augmenting or undermining or usurping my point in being here at all? Is it doing that for me, or is it doing that for my neighbour? And then act accordingly. Putting AI first and then addressing the questions it raises is subtly but dangerously wrong. Technology has its own voice, and part of that voice, the voice of contemporary AI, has a very particular religious dimension. It is championing a race toward ever more powerful AI, but it's being shaped towards ideological and not just economic ends. There are a number of mixed motives amongst the people who are trying to develop this new, ever more powerful technology. But we need to wake up and see that for many of them, they don't particularly mind what happens to the planet or to the social structures or even to the majority of human beings alive today. In which case, the consequences for education, for employment, for democracy, and indeed for pastoral work are only just getting going. A particular call then to fellow Christians to understand the demands of this moment, to become as wise as serpents and not simply to remain as innocent as doves. Then we will know what to anticipate, what to welcome, but also what to redirect, and even what we need to resist as this race for ever more powerful AI accelerates around us. How to keep our own heads above the water, and how to rescue our drowning neighbour. Because God's purpose for AI is to augment the point of being human, not to usurp, not to replace, and not to enslave us. We Christians talk about the gospel, the good news, for a reason. The railroad was big, AI is going to be bigger. But the psalmist reminds us the whole earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. Everything belongs to the God in whose image we are fearfully and wonderfully made. That is the starting point for Christianity, and it flows from a deeply considered and hope-filled perspective on the point of being human. And with it the sure and certain hope that goodness will triumph in the end. Thank you very much.